Hey, Scott Sambucci here. It is time for yet another daily dose edition of the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. So we're going to continue along with our series of podcast episodes here, our daily dose editions of the podcast, talking about the first principles, the 10 sales rules for startup founders when it comes to your early stage sales process. And so over the course of the last couple of weeks, starting with a LinkedIn post I did several weeks ago, we've been walking through each one of these 10 first principles one by one to help you as a startup founder get more clear as to what those principles are, making sure that you're aware of these 10 principles and the things that you should be doing each and every day with you and your early team, as well as giving you some examples or strategies that you might be able to implement right away to put these to work. So a couple of things I want to suggest that you do if you haven't already, as you've been listening to these episodes around these first principles or any other of the podcasts, or maybe you're following me on LinkedIn, you're seeing the workshops and webinars, maybe you've participated in some of those in the past that we've been running. If we haven't had a chat, if we haven't sat down and looked at your sales process, we love to run what we call situation sessions. These are one-on-one calls with startup founders to get a good look at your situation for your startup. And in these calls, what we'll do is swap a little bit of information, some ideas around getting clear on where you are right now with your startup, where you want to be, where you need to be in the next 6, 12, 24 months. And then from there, diving into identifying some specific gaps or opportunities that you've got so that you can build and start building out a plan to build a more repeatable, scalable sales process. So if you've yet to do that and book a call with me or somebody on my team, I would definitely encourage you to do it. These are pro bono calls that we do because we want to help as many founders as possible. Now, of course, if there's room for us and ways for us to work together in a more intimate capacity through our coaching program or some kind of consulting work, then of course we can talk about that in another call. But for now, for you, for your startup right now, we absolutely want to help you get out of the weeds, help you understand where you might have some gaps and blind spots, and jam on some ideas to give you some future and a look at what you should be doing now, the next 6 months, the next 12 months. So if you haven't already booked that call, just shoot me an email, scott@salesqualia, scott@salesqualia, QUALIA.com. Just type the word private into the subject line. It will indicate to me in my system that you just want to grab a quick call. We'll get a calendar on the books and start swapping ideas, get some information about where you are so we can jump right in before we speak or as we speak. Okay. So let's get into the next principle. So this is the 6th installment of first principles for 10 sales rules for startup founders. And in this episode, what we're going to talk about is the principle of narrow your niche. Narrow your niche. So I want to give a big hat tip to Aaron Ross. Many of you might recognize that name, Aaron Ross. He is the co-author of a book called Predictable Revenue. Then he also wrote a book with Jason Lemkin. So his book, Predictable Revenue, he co-authored with Mary Lou Tyler, both of them are good friends of our coaching program. We've had both of them come in and do live trainings and sessions with our founders in our startup selling group. We had Aaron come in person a couple of years ago, met with the founders in our team. He did an online training for our group during COVID. Mary Lou, we've had her twice come into our client event, our in-person, in real life events in the past. We've had her come in there. We've had her do several podcast episodes here as well. So 2 people I really know and really trust. So Aaron is the co-author of Predictable Revenue with Mary Lou Tyler, and he's also the co-author of a book called From Impossible to Inevitable, which he co-authored with Jason Lemkin. And so having known Aaron for over the years, one of the things that he has been constantly talking to startups over these years is the importance of narrowing their niche or narrow your niche. So the reason this is such a critical part of your sales process and what we would consider a first principle is that, whether you are just literally trying to get those first 10 customers, you're trying to grow to $1 million in revenue, $1 million ARR, or $3 or even $10 million in annual recurring revenue. What we have found over the years is that if you're a startup that wants to make a big impact, chances are your total addressable market, your TAM, is in the billions or maybe even trillions. So that's huge opportunity, right? That's why you started your startup, is you wanted to help a big industry. You wanted to make a big impact. And so the reason that narrow your niche is so important is that There's no way, it's impossible, literally impossible to sell to everyone in your total addressable market. In fact, investors might say, well, yes, you have your total addressable market, but what's your total serviceable market? Or as we've had a recent podcast guest, his name is Bocar Diaz, he actually pares down even further to say what's your initial serviceable market. So you go from your TAM to your SAM to your IM, I guess, or your ISM. And the idea here is that, yes, you want to make a big impact and you want to affect an entire industry. But for now, there's only a certain niche or subsegment within that larger marketplace that you are able to sell to for a variety of reasons. Maybe the reason you're able to sell to that subsegment is because of the specific version of the problem that they have that you're able to solve with your product. Remember our last episode, product problem fit before product market fit. You've got to solve a problem. And even though you could sell to thousands of companies across the world, you could sell everyone from a top Fortune 500 company down to, a small group of small businesses within your industry. You've got to narrow down on that niche to identify what version of the problem can you sell to, what version of the problem can you solve right now. You might also be about market access. Maybe you've got access to a certain part of the total marketplace because of your personal experience, because of your own network, because of the investors and the advisors that you have around you. So yes, you could sell to Fortune 500s, but for now, because of your personal experience and your personal network, you find like, no, actually the Fortune 500s are a little bit out of range for us right now. Instead, we want to focus on mid-markets. We want to focus on companies between 100 million and $1 billion in revenue. And maybe the certain systems that they're using that you'd have to collaborate with are really defined and designed to work well with your solution. And that's yet another reason why you would want to and need to narrow your niche a little bit more. Maybe it's around the accessibility to the buyers. It's much easier perhaps to find buyers in that mid-market segment than it is to sell and find the buyers in those Fortune 500 companies. So there's a lot of reasons why you need to narrow your niche. And if you don't narrow your niche, then you're going to be one of those companies that's trying to sell to everyone, but ends up selling to no one. So I'm going to give you a couple examples here of narrowing your niche, just from some recent conversations I've had with founders in our own program, our own coaching program, as well as my personal experience. So just the other day, I was on a call with one of our two co-founders that we're working with. And they're in that phase where they're getting those first 10 paying customers. And when they look across, there's actually different industries they could be selling to. And within those different industries, they narrowed it down to CPG companies. So consumer product, consumer packaged goods, CPGs. Now, as we started talking about CPGs, right? So CPGs itself, right? Huge industry or huge segment, because there could be food companies, there could be consumer packaged goods, like, for example, razor blades or toothpaste. Those are also CPGs, right? There's hand lotion is a CPG, not just food, as an example, right? And then within CPGs, there's huge companies, there's medium-sized companies, there's small companies. So as we started to look at the problem that they are focusing in on, we started to identify that there's actually a certain match of the problem they solve and their expertise and the specific missions and visions of the companies they want to sell to. So because the company we're coaching focuses on the sustainability space, we looked at, hey, what if we could carve out a certain set of CPGs in the food industry that also have a sustainability mission for themselves? And so this is an example of going from very broad and big and huge and global down to a more target market. And so we still got some more work to do when it comes to narrowing down even within food CPGs that have a sustainability mission, because there's big companies and small companies. There might be nutrition companies that are different from companies that are selling food that's consumed every day. But what we're talking about here is going from really broad down to more and more narrow. So you need to narrow your niche. So another company that we were working with was talking about they're a business lending platform. And as a business lending platform, they were working with banks, and they could work with banks across the world to deliver this business lending platform as a way for those banks to help them more quickly get more applications for their small business lending, provide a better consumer experience or a better borrowing experience, and then ultimately get to a decision much more quickly so that those businesses applying for a loan through that bank or financial market company could more quickly get a decision, right? Now, small business lending is a huge industry. Everyone from Wells Fargo and JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America does small business lending, all the way down to the local credit unions or the small regional banks that do small business lending. And so this company, as we talk to them, has started narrowed down their niche to say they are only focusing on credit unions. And they're focusing on credit unions for a couple of really specific reasons, because the credit unions have really close partnerships with those small businesses. Oftentimes, the small businesses in a local area want to work with a credit union because they have a desire to have a close, intimate relationship. They like the idea of how the credit unions are operating, and they're in some ways more stable and more sound on the balance sheet, as we're seeing, versus some of the other bigger banks more recently. And the problem that these credit unions have is that though they don't often have access to the kind of technology that this startup has been building. Other big banks like JP Morgan or Bank of America or Wells Fargo or US Bank or whatever, they often have access to other technology platforms that could be used as part of their small business lending platforms or small business lending programs. They can either, buy other outsourced software from big companies like Fiserv and others. They could build it themselves, right? They could partner with other smaller banks to be the back-end lender so that the small banks only receive the applications, and then they're the ones that are actually funding those business loans themselves. And so there's all kinds of reasons why those bigger banks may not necessarily be the right target market for them right now. Later on, it could be, but for now, what they realize is that the credit unions, because of the relationships with the small businesses, because they don't necessarily have access to the right technology, and because there's such competition for keeping those businesses as their customers, they realize hey, this is the right fit for us for now. And as they enter the US market and they start to think about growing and scaling, they can identify and say, these are the types of companies that we're going to target for now. So it's an example of narrowing your niche so that every bit of conversation you're having and the vernacular that you're using is different. And knowing that those credit unions know that you know their business. So as an example, banks think about their customers as customers. Credit unions think about their customers as members. You're a member of the credit union versus a customer at a bank. Now, that's an important nuance, because if you go into a credit union and say, well, help you get more customers, that's showing that credit union that you actually don't understand their business and their philosophy and why they're a credit union and not a bank. Credit unions are not banks. They are credit unions. They don't think of their customers as customers. They have members of their credit union. And so these are examples as to why you want to narrow your niche, because it's going to help you get more intimate and more specific and help your future customers know that you understand their business, that you can help them solve their specific problem that they have. And by focusing on those problems for that specific niche of customers, that's going to help accelerate your sales process. You're going to have better qualified leads. You're going to have better conversations with those leads. You're going to have a higher pull through for those sales opportunities in your pipeline. And ultimately, you're going to have a higher level of success when you implement with those early customers. And even within credit unions, that in itself is still a huge industry within the United States. So it's not like they're giving up, the opportunity to grow. Even getting to $10 million in revenue should be, in a lot of ways, no problem for any startup. Your company should be able to find and build to $10 million in revenue with a super specific niche part of the total addressable market. If you find yourself really struggling to get to $10 million in revenue with a niche, then that should be a signal that you want to niche even more, niche down to where it's painful. Because the more specific, the more niche you are, the more expertise you're going to be able to deliver, the more specific your messaging and your targeting is going to be. And ultimately, the more successful your customers are going to be once you implement, which is going to help you get more upsells and resells to those current customers. And it's going to build your reputation as being a successful technology company to partner with. So that's exactly why you need to narrow your niche. I know it's painful. I know it's difficult. I know you want to save the world across the total addressable market, but narrowing your niche is the first step to growing and scaling your startup. So that's why it's one of the first principles. So if you haven't narrowed your niche yet, one of the things you might think about doing as an exercise is look at the current customers that you do have. Even if you're doing $1 million or 2 or 3 in revenue, look at those customers and think about the parameters by which you could rate those customers. You could think of them in terms of maybe total employee size. You could think of them in total revenue. It could be thinking about the outcomes you help them achieve. And in a sense, think about how could you create a scatter plot of the different customers that you have. Even if you only have a handful of customers now, you could also think about the sales opportunities that you have in your pipeline and scatter plot those. And think about how are you starting to see some groupings of where you've had early customers or better traction in your sales opportunities. And are there clusters within that scatter plot where you're starting to identify like, oh, actually it's easier to reach decision makers. The problem themselves are more important and more urgent to this group. There's a willingness to spend money on this. There's willingness to work with the outside vendors as opposed to the sense that they need to build on their own versus working with an external partner. Are the decision criteria more clear? Are there criteria? Is there even criteria that these companies have established for themselves? Or do you find yourselves doing a lot of education just to help people understand the problem that they have and that they should take action in the first place? So start to think about what the clusters could be with the early customers you have, with the sales opportunities that you have. And even it might mean that maybe you work on a segment, a sub-segment where you're going to get lower dollars per customer, but even if you're getting lower customers per dollar, but you're getting faster turn times, faster close times, you're getting higher win rates, then that's going to accelerate your sales. It's going to help you continue to prove out this problem product fit and then start moving towards product market fit later on in a much faster way, as opposed to spreading yourself out too thin and ultimately trying to sell to everyone, but ultimately selling to no one. So this first principle of narrow your niche really works well with the previous one that we just talked about, which is problem product fit before product market fit. You've got to be willing to get narrow on your niche, narrow to the point where it's almost painful. And as Aaron Ross shared with our teams that when he did his coaching session, when he did his live training around narrowing his niche, he said to him, he challenged our startups, and this is something I'll transfer over to you. He said, imagine you could only sell to 10 companies in the world. Imagine you could only sell to 10. What 10 would those be? Which 10 companies would they be? And if you could only sell to those 10, what would your strategy be in terms of outreach and customer discovery and identifying the right targeting and the right messaging? How would you create conversations with those 10 companies and the people, the decision makers in those 10 companies? How would you identify what their problem is and what their urgency is? And how would you show them how you could solve problems that they have? And how would you implement with them if you could only sell to 10? And that's a really important thought exercise because, again, while there's a huge total addressable market, think about what if you can only sell to 10? What would those 10 be like? Because chances are in your marketplace, there's more than just 10, right? So if you can get super niche down to just 10, as Aaron shared with our group, then from there, that will help you build the right targeting, the right messaging, the right way to think about your sales process, the right implementation strategy. So those early customers can be successful. Because once you do that with those 10, chances are with a high probability, there's 100 or maybe even 1,000 of those in that niche, but you just need to be willing to look for it. Okay. So narrow your niche is a first principle when it comes to startup selling. So that's where I'm going to end it from here for today. So reminder, if we haven't had a chat about your sales process, your situation, maybe identifying some obstacles or obstructions, things that are getting in the way or slowing you down or stopping you from getting to that next level of growth, then let's do that. Let's have that call. Shoot me an email, scott@salesqualia.com. Type the word private into the subject line. That will tell me that you want to have a private conversation about your sales process. We'll get a calendar on the books with me or somebody on my team. And we'll help you identify what strategies you should be thinking about implementing over the next 6-12 months to help you get on your way and implementing with some of these first principles. Okay. So thanks so much for listening, as always, to the Startup Selling Show. We got a couple more of these Daily Dose Edition podcasts coming up when it comes to these first principles. So keep an eye out for those. Share this episode with a friend or 10. And until our next episode, go out there and implement. See ya.